Never in my wildest dreams, Audrey, did I ever see myself leaving the hospital world. I really thought I would stay in the hospital in some type of role until I retired.
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. What if stepping away from the bedside didn't mean leaving nursing behind, but expanding what it means to be a nurse? Today's guest is Dr. Luanne Jones, a NICU nurse turned industry leader who's proving that nurses belong in every corner of healthcare. After nearly 3 decades in neonatal care, Luann made the leap into health tech, where she now serves as Director of Customer Success and Project Management at AngelEye Health. In this conversation, Luann shares how she translated 28 years of clinical experience into a leadership role in tech, the identity shift that comes with leaving the hospital, and why nurses are critical to innovation in healthcare. If you've ever questioned whether your nursing skills could be applied outside of direct patient care, Luann's story might just change your perception of what's possible.
Thanks for having me, Audrey. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, I'm so glad that we're getting to chat today and share your story. I know that your story actually begins with a personal experience in the NICU. Can you share a little bit about how that time in your life influenced kind of your decision to go into neonatal nursing?
Sure. Well, I was a young mom. I married my high school sweetheart, and we found out we were pregnant in my first year of college. And unbeknownst to us, our life was going to really turn upside down. Not only did we have our first child, but he was born at 29 weeks gestation, first premature baby born in our family. So it was a completely foreign experience for all of us. And he ended up spending 3 months in the level 4 NICU at Arkansas Children's Hospital.
Wow, yeah. I mean, had you entered into nursing school yet? Like, had you decided at that point you were going to be a nurse?
Nursing was the furthest thing from my mind. I was going to be a journalism major. That was something I was very passionate about. But the 3 months in the NICU really, again, was a life-changing experience in so many ways. It was while we were in the NICU that I had a couple of very influential people kind of plant the seed of nursing in my brain. I like to credit Dr. Billy Thomas, who was one of the neonatologists taking care of our son, Drew. He happened to be walking through the unit one day after Drew had been there for at least a couple of months by that point. And he just stopped and very calmly said, "You know, you're in the unit a lot, like enough that you've probably learned as much as these nurses know. You should think about going to nursing school." And then he, meandered away and just left that little seed planted. And then we were very fortunate to have a wonderful primary nurse taking care of us. And I say us because she cared for my husband and myself as much as she did our son. She nurtured that little seed and really went on to become a good mentor and friend of mine and coworker later on down the road.
That's so cool. And, in the NICU, in the ICU, it's the same way versus something like the ER. When you have these patients that stay forever, you really do get to form that bond with the family. So it's really cool to hear that you had such a great care team and that not only were they influential in your child's outcome and like your family's experience, but also what you ended up doing with the rest of your career.
Yes. Well, and there was another neonatologist, Dr. Bonnie Taylor, felt a little defeated when my first attempt at applying for nursing school, I got waitlisted. It was for a local associate's degree program, and Dr. Taylor actually followed my son for a couple of years in the high-risk newborn clinic after his discharge from the NICU, and she is the one that encouraged me to just apply for the BSN program. She actually even wrote a reference letter that I swear to this day is responsible for me getting accepted into the BSN program. So yeah, a lot of connections there along the way and a lot of support from our NICU care team, both during the NICU stay and afterwards.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. Can you share a little bit about like what those early days of your nursing career looked like? So, working in the NICU and kind of what your roles evolved into over time?
Sure. Well, between my junior and senior years of nursing school, I had the fortunate opportunity to take part in a nurse internship program. I was actually chosen for the NICU, and during that summer, it just really validated that I was meant to be a NICU nurse. So much so that I ended up getting a student nurse assistant, a paying job, once the internship was over. So I worked in the NICU as a student nurse assistant or patient care tech, if you will, during that senior year of school. Unfortunately, when I graduated, there was a hiring freeze, and so I was not hired on as a bedside nurse in the NICU right away. I spent about a year working as an adult intensive care unit nurse, and even though that was not the path that I wanted to take, it was important in that it did validate that I was meant to be a NICU nurse. So I got right back to the NICU as soon as I could. I then spent several years as a bedside nurse, and then someone else very influential in my life, a dear friend, a colleague and mentor, Lori Lee. She was a neonatal nurse practitioner in the unit, and one day she approached me and said, "You should think about going to NMP school," which I did, and then I ended up graduating with my master's degree and spent just over 14 years as a neonatal nurse practitioner, all in the same unit where my son had once been a patient. At that time, I got tapped on the shoulder and encouraged to apply for a NICU director position that was open, had been open for about 9 months. Wasn't planning on going into nursing leadership, but that's where I ended up. And then I spent 10 years as the NICU director, leaving that role in August of 2022. So.
Wow. Yeah, it shows up again and again in these podcasts where someone does kind of get that tap on the shoulder and an opportunity that they really hadn't even considered for themselves is suddenly right there in front of them. So it's interesting. That's part of your story as well. And, looking beyond that role, had you imagined that you would one day step into industry or even away from bedside beyond like a leadership position?
Never in my wildest dreams, Audrey, did I ever see myself leaving the hospital world. I really thought I would stay in the hospital in some type of role until I retired. But I will say that the pandemic, the stress of the pandemic definitely changed the course of my career. And like many healthcare providers and nurse leaders, the pandemic took its toll on me personally. Even though I think a lot of people felt that the world of pediatrics was somewhat sheltered from the effects of the pandemic, it was not. We still had a lot of the same challenges, maybe not quite the same level and scope as the adult healthcare world, but it was still very challenging. And so through the course of leading a large team, a large unit through the pandemic experience, it definitely made me start to rethink my career and what opportunities might be out there.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a tough time to be a leader, especially with how much uncertainty there was and like needing to communicate with your staff through that uncertainty and still be able to advocate for them the best that you can. I mean, that I can only imagine, how challenging that must have been.
Yeah, extremely challenging. I don't think anyone could have been prepared for the challenges and demands that the pandemic brought. But in all the negative, it was also very positive because I think it kind of forced lots of people and organizations and healthcare systems to relook at the way care was being provided, get more innovative, and also, just we definitely had to become agile, right, and learn how to pivot when the next crisis popped up that seemed to be happening every day, sometimes multiple times per day.
Yeah, definitely. And so when you started feeling like it was time for a change, it was time for something different, how did you even begin to explore what opportunities there were for you outside of the hospital setting?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'm very fortunate that the NICU world, a relatively niche, small community. And in 2015, I was still a fairly new NICU director at the time. I was introduced to Sonova Associates, which holds a NICU leadership forum, a conference every year. 2015 was the first year that I attended this conference, and that was definitely a life-changing event for me in my professional career. I got exposed to a whole network, a whole community of other nurse leaders who were going through the exact same trials and tribulations that I was as a NICU leader. And I started to form a really, good bond and community of support by going to that conference, which after I came back from the first conference, I let my boss know that this is a conference that I will be at every year. I'm going to keep going back. And I have. I've been to NICU Leadership Forum now every year since. But not only did I build a community of nurse leader colleagues and peers, I also got introduced to a lot of industry partners and built relationships with them along the way. It was actually, one of them became a friend and mentor of mine. And it was actually at the NICU Leadership Forum, the first one back in person, towards the end of the pandemic. She pulled me aside and just asked me, "Hey, Luann, are you okay?" And I had to truthfully answer, "No, I'm not really okay." Leadership is hard. It was hard before the pandemic, and it's definitely, since the pandemic, become a lot harder, and it's taking its toll. And she was the one who pulled me aside, said, "Let's go grab a cup of coffee." We had a chat, and she said, "Then you should consider coming over to industry. Your years of experience, your knowledge, your expertise could benefit so many different companies that work in the NICU space. You should just think about it." And she planted that seed, and then the rest is kind of history now.
Yeah, that's incredible because, if you've only ever worked in the hospital setting, it does take something like a conference where you're exposed to a new network and new conversations and new people to really kind of open your eyes to the different types of opportunities that you may not have even considered yet. And so tell me about how AngelEye more specifically kind of came onto your radar and what ultimately drew you to the role there.
Well, I first became aware of AngelEye Health actually as a NICU director, seeking out a company that does exactly what they do, provide bedside cameras to support patient and family-centered care in the NICU space. Interestingly enough, when I first sought them out, this was in 2014, I ended up not choosing them as the vendor. But years later, a good friend of mine and colleague who was also a NICU director at the time, she became the first clinician or one of the first clinicians to actually work for AngelEye Health. And I ran into her at a NICU leadership forum, literally ran into her in a dark parking lot. But we took a few minutes to catch up with each other, and I said, "How are things going in your unit?" And that's when she let me know she had made the hard decision of leaving the clinical world, and she took the brave step of moving into industry. And I'm like, "Really? Okay, well, I'm looking for a new camera company to provide service in our unit." And so I ended up becoming a customer of AngelEye at that time. So that's when I first really got to know the AngelEye team. Again, year after year at conferences, we would, associate with each other, have conversations with each other in the exhibit hall and inside and outside of the exhibit hall, actually. And just, I started getting to know them as people, not just the vendor for the company that I did business with. And that's what's unique about the NICU Leadership Forum that Sonova Associates does sponsor every year. It is a small community, and they intentionally bring industry leaders and clinical leaders together in the same small space. So there is room for that networking and that conversation to happen. And it was through, that annual conference that I was able to continue to get to know the AngelEye team. And when I started to seriously think about moving into the industry space, the advice that my friend mentor had given to me was look for a company that their mission and their values align with yours. Because of my personal experience as a NICU mom, I have always been an advocate for patient and family-centered care. And that's what AngelEye Health is all about, supporting NICU patients and families and helping support teams, which is also something I've always been passionate about throughout my NICU career. So it just seemed to be a great match. They were the first company that I approached, and turned out they were hiring, and that's how I found myself in the role of Director of Customer Success and Project Management.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's really cool that beforehand you already knew the product because you had been using it on your unit. And I totally agree with you on the importance of finding a company that you align with as far as mission goes. Because nurses, we're a passionate people. Like, we want to feel good about what we're doing. We want to make an impact. So I think that for our network of people versus, just the general public, I think that is really important. And something else that I want to call out too is also just that AngelEye was incorporating clinicians. Like, they already saw the value of that clinical experience. And that seems like kind of an obvious thing. Like, if you're building something for the clinical setting, of course you would want clinicians kind of behind the scenes, but it's not quite as commonplace as you might think. So I think that finding a company too that really does value that clinical experience that nurses are bringing is really important in that kind of transition.
I couldn't agree more. And that is another thing that caught my eye about AngelEye Health. My friend, who was, again, the first or one of the first clinical leaders that they brought onto the company, she quickly grew the team. And now we have over 20 clinicians, not just nurses, but also registered dietitians who worked in the NICU space, who are part of our team contributing to the innovation and the thought and the design behind the products and services that we provide. And that couldn't be more important. I mean, we've lived in the NICU space. We've worked in the NICU space. We, better than anyone else, understand the problems and the challenges that teams and parents face. So that's why it's important for companies like AngelEye Health to have clinicians on their team to really drive the work forward and make sure that you're meeting the needs of those that we're trying to serve.
Absolutely. It's the key to success.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about what a typical day in the life looks like for you in the industry world? I think that if you've only ever worked at the bedside, working at home or in an office or in industry seems totally foreign. I used to joke, but I was also kind of serious. Before I left the bedside, I was like, unless you're the mailman, I really don't understand what you do all day in your job. So walk us through a little bit, like what a day in the life looks like in your position.
Sure. Well, I feel like I have it the best of both worlds. I do go into an office most days, but I have the ability to work remote if and when needed. So that flexibility is really nice, but I am a people person. So for me personally, it would be hard for me to be a full-on remote worker just because I like to have that people interaction. Just it so happens that when AngelEye was hiring, they were looking to hire a nurse leader specifically to work out of our technical office that's located in Little Rock, Arkansas, and that's where I live. So it couldn't have been a
Perfect.
better match on both sides. But for me, a typical day is I go into the office, I interact with the technical team on or in our company. I work closely with our customer support, our tech support. I work closely with the senior leadership. And when I'm wearing my director of customer success hat, what that means is that I'm interacting with NICU leaders regularly every day. I'm on a Zoom call, or sometimes I do have the opportunity to travel and go into their NICU to look and see how they're using our product and fully help them optimize how they're using the product, whether it be the hardware or the software or some of both. And one thing that's really cool about AngelEye Health is we don't just do cameras anymore. We don't just do live streaming video. We offer a full platform of solutions that support patients and families and NICU teams. So when I'm there, I'm hoping to help them fully optimize any and all of the solutions that we provide. So I do a lot of, again, talking to nurse leaders, talking to bedside nurses, hearing from them what's working well with our product in their space, where are their challenges, what ideas or insights do they have that we can then take back to our development team to make our products even better. So that's what to me is the most fun part of the job. Also, another fun part when I'm wearing my director of project management hat, that just means I oversee the project management teams that are actually implementing all of our solutions. So there's nothing more exciting than to help a NICU get their camera system live. And they've, really been wanting this and working hard towards that, and getting the parent feedback when they've gone live with our cameras for the first time, being able to, live that experience with them brings back all the positive memories of when we stood up a camera system in my NICU and really what that meant, the impact that had on the families and the teams too. It's nice and fun to be part of it from the opposite side of the table now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I totally align with you on the enjoyment that comes from getting to be that bridge between the clinical and technical worlds. Like really using your background to understand what pain points need to be solved on the clinical side and taking that back to your technical team and saying, okay, let me like really explain this to where you understand what the product needs to do for these end users. So even more special that you have the experience not only of NICU mom and NICU nurse, but also NICU leadership. So you can really relate to everyone kind of on the other side of that bridge. So that's incredible.
Yeah, it has really been a great experience. I've been with AngelEye now just over 2 years, and I still feel very much immersed in the neonatal intensive care world because, again, I'm talking to NICU leaders every day, helping, like you said, be the interpreter, if you will, but that bridge between the technical and the clinical worlds. And that's what you do a lot as a NICU leader as well. When you're advocating for your team, you're also having to, be the translator to the IT world within the hospital or maybe to the supply chain folks. You're always having to communicate what those needs are. So the skills that I learned and developed as a bedside nurse, a neonatal nurse practitioner, and a NICU leader have all been very much transferable to the industry world.
Yeah, definitely. And, when making that pivot from the hospital world to industry, there are typically some things, some mindset shifts that a nurse needs to kind of overcome. I've talked to some other guests about kind of this struggle with our identity because nurses tend to be so tied, our personal identity is so tied to our profession that sometimes that can feel a little bit disorienting when you're making that pivot. Can you speak to any experience like that you had to kind of shift your mindset when you transitioned from hospital to industry?
Absolutely. Everything you just said resonates with me completely. The biggest shift for me was realizing that in the industry world, there's just not quite as much structure as I was used to in the hospital world. A good example is in the hospital world, there's a policy for everything, a policy and procedure for every single thing. And I have found that, especially in the tech space in which I live now, it's a little bit more relaxed, if you will. There is structure where there's structure needed, but the rigidity is definitely not there. But that's not a bad thing. I have found it very freeing, if you will, to say, I'm not, stuck in this path. I can actually, think outside the box. Sometimes the very rigid, structured world of the hospital can be kind of squash innovation, if you will, because you are really kind of relegated to operating within certain principles in a certain space. But being on the technology side, it's like dream big, the sky's the limit. Let's throw those ideas out there, and the ones that we think are really worth moving forward on, we'll figure out how to make it work. So yeah, just being in a less rigid space was quite the adjustment, especially for a nurse who's used to maybe like clocking in and out for their shift. It's like, well, when you become a salaried employee on the industry side, there's more flexibility to your workday. You're not punching the clock. You have a little bit more freedom and flexibility in terms of just your work schedule. Like I mentioned, I can go into the office, but some days if I need to work from home, I have the flexibility to do that as well. So that was a little bit of an adjustment, but it's been a good adjustment. But when you mentioned having your identity tied to your role as a nurse, that couldn't be more true. We as nurses really do kind of define ourselves personally and professionally around that role of the nurse. And when you're outside of the hospital, I myself went through a little bit of a crisis, if you will, of identity crisis. Am I still a nurse now that I'm not in the hospital setting? And that led me to seek out others who have made the transition. And in doing so, and I found them on LinkedIn, I found them at conferences when I was talking to other vendors and other nurses like myself who moved over to the industry space. I found that they all went through the similar process, identity crisis process. And, what we all kind of figured out is that we are still nurses. I still am a registered nurse. I no longer hold my advanced practice nurse license, but I'm still a registered nurse. I'm still advocating for patients and families, just from a different seat at the table. But when others around you in the professional world don't really have that same mindset, it can be a little bit isolating. I did feel a little bit ostracized, if you will, when I first attended my first conference as a vendor instead of a nurse leader participant. I was still the same person. I still had all the same experience, knowledge, degrees, certifications, all the things, but suddenly I was treated a little bit differently. Now that you have a vendor badge, you have to, go over here, stay over here, do these things or not do these things. And that was a little hard too. It was a little bit of a culture shock, if you will. But what I'm finding is that more people are starting to see the value of having nurses and nurse leaders in industry. And I think we are slowly but surely carving out a space for ourselves and starting to shift that paradigm and having people see nurses outside of the hospital as nurses too.
I agree. I do think that, over the past few years in particular, I think there's been a bit more of a shift about what exactly it can mean to be a nurse. And I experienced a lot of the same of what you described from within the nursing profession when, it was like, oh, I'm leaving the bedside and going to work in health tech. It was as if that was looked down upon or not, kind of
you were suddenly less than.
Exactly. Yes. And it's like a throwing away of my achievements and my, my ability to make an impact as a nurse if I'm choosing to leave direct patient care. And I do think that is something that needs to continue to shift within the nursing profession, because nurses can, as you're an example of this, so many guests that come on this podcast are an example of this. Nurses can make such an impact on
Yes.
patient care and patient experience without being right there hands-on with the patient. And I think that it's so important that if we're going to make these broad strokes to really change healthcare and to innovate, I think we do need nurses to be stepping away from the bedside and take on these roles where they do have a seat at the table and they're part of these discussions about these innovations, changes that will actually impact patient care down the road. So yeah, I think that that's a really important thing to call out. And I am hopeful that that's shifting. I sense that it's shifting. Maybe that's because I'm in these types of conversations all the time now, but I do feel that's shifting. And I also wanted to kind of rewind and step back to what you said about kind of the lack of structure when you stepped into this role, because I think that's a really common experience too. And you at least had some leadership experience where your day wasn't necessarily run by, I clock in at 6:45, I take report, I've got 8 a.m. meds
Right.
due, I've got a 10 a.m. lab draw. So,
The to-do list, the
yes,
checklist.
exactly. Your day as a bedside nurse is so structured and is so task oriented, and you don't have a lot of downtime or like flexibility where you're like, what can I rearrange in my day here? And so I think that that ambiguity when you step away from the bedside can catch a lot of nurses off guard. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think it's important to talk about so that nurses can start to mentally prepare, even for how they would answer an interview question about how they can manage their own time or work within an more ambiguous environment. One of my first roles away from the bedside, I was a customer success manager. And in that role, it wasn't so hard because my day was pretty much dictated by what was in my inbox, which customers I needed to get back to, what meetings I was in, what projects I was working on with internal teams, things like that. But I remember when I stepped into a marketing role, a much more creative role. I'm not really working with external customers. It really was just about, okay, these are the things I'm going to get done this quarter, between, January and the end of March. What am I going to do with my time to get these things accomplished? And that felt overwhelming at first before I kind of figured it out, because it was truly up to me to dictate how the hours in my day were spent. So I think that nurses are very capable of figuring that out. We're great
good
at
at pivoting.
prioritizing. Yes, absolutely. Like, we have all of the skills that we need to figure it out. I do just think that is a mindset shift, maybe not to take for granted when you're pivoting into something new.
No, I agree 1,000%. I've actually hired some bedside nurses now into the company, and I think they would agree with everything you just described. That life of a bedside nurse is very dictated hour to hour. Know that when meds are due, when it's time for vitals, that sort of thing. And that I do think that helped me because I moved into industry from a leadership role where, as you described, I did have a little bit more control and flexibility within my day-to-day, although when I was in the heat of it, it didn't feel that way. But in hindsight, yes, I had more control over what the day would look like. And what you described is very much what my day is like too. I do have some routine meetings and such on the calendar, but then there is flexibility to pivot and, work on an internal process improvement project. Or I also work closely in my role with our operations team and designing and developing the next hardware that we're going to implement. So I get to use a lot of that flexibility to do fun, creative, and innovative things that definitely make the change, the loss of structure, makes it all worth it. Because again, it creates an environment where, can dream big and do cool, big things as well.
Definitely. And I want to talk some about, some tactical things that nurses who, are at the bedside or even in a leadership role in the hospital setting now, if they're starting to feel that pull to something different, to explore what else is out there. What are some suggestions you might have for them? I know that you've mentioned kind of like leadership conferences and the roles that like that has played for you. What are some things that nurses who are in the hospital setting now can start thinking about to expand their network and explore opportunities?
Well, you said network. That's the top advice that I give to people who reach out to me now. Either they know me personally or we've met, at a conference, or they have run across me on LinkedIn. I do get a lot of people reach out who say, how do I break in the industry? Because it's hard. How do I know where to find these jobs? And what I say is build that network, even as a bedside nurse. If you can attend conferences, if you can be a part of your professional nursing organization, find ways to network and grow that community of support outside of your hospital, because that's the other thing that we tend to do. We get very siloed in nursing. We work in our unit, in our hospital, and we don't really venture out of that space enough. And that siloing can be very detrimental from all different kinds of perspectives. But branching out, getting to know people, building that network is important. And one of the benefits of attending national conferences is there almost always is going to be an exhibit hall where you can walk and meet the people behind the products. That's another thing that I'd like to remind people of. There are people behind the products and services. We tend to, I think, view, and I speak as a former NICU director, when I would, get sales reps leaving me voicemails, sending me emails, it's really easy to forget that these are people who are behind the products. And some companies like AngelEye Health that I'm proud to work for now have clinicians who have lived your experience. They've walked in your shoes. They're there for a reason, because they're advocating using their experience. They're advocating on your behalf and on behalf of the patients you take care of. So, build your network. LinkedIn is a great tool for building that network. Pick up the phone. Don't be afraid to message someone, just like I messaged you when I saw you advertise this opportunity. It's like, don't be afraid to just reach out to someone through text, message, email, and ask, advice, tips. If you are looking for an industry job, think about those companies whose products you use each and every day that you really can get behind and that you support. That's what my friend and mentor told me when she said, you should think about industry. Her advice was, Luann, get the conference book, flip to the exhibitor section, and just go through the list, go through the whole section and find those companies, those industry partners that have the products, the mission, the values that you can align yourself with. And just reach out to them. Get your resume in front of them and let them know that you're interested in whatever opportunities they have, because there is a shift happening. There are more and more companies, especially that I know of in the NICU space, that are looking to hire more clinicians, and not just bedside nurses, but other healthcare providers who have that clinical expertise and knowledge that can help them make their products and services better. So just put yourself out there.
That's such good advice. And I really, when you're saying don't be afraid to reach out, send the message, make the call, send the email. When I first was kind of exposing myself to what networking actually meant, because that was pretty foreign to me. I hadn't needed to do that as a bedside nurse. I don't know if it was, I hate to say it, but it felt a little bit like I'm just a nurse. Like, what are these? What's the perception of this
That's
person
my
on
least
the other
favorite
end?
saying, by the way. I'm just a nurse.
I know. Me too. Yeah. I hadn't seen the light yet, right? Like I was unsure of what the perception of the person on the other end of that conversation would be of me. And to be honest, it was my fear that they would perceive me as just a nurse. She's just a nurse. Why is she messaging me about this tech job or, whatever it might have been? And I think that that's something that we as nurses just need to push out of our minds, right? Like, as soon as you can remove that barrier for yourself, my experience was I realized how highly these people on the other end of the conversation actually regarded nurses. and their perception was actually much better than I had anticipated. And so I think that once you start, you remove that barrier for yourself, you start opening yourself up to these conversations, then you can start to gain confidence and realize, okay, these other people already see my value. I just need to see it in myself now so that I can go pursue these new opportunities.
Yeah. What you described, that's really interesting to me because I did spend 4 years serving on the board of directors of the National Association of Neonatal Nurses. And when you said just a nurse, I can remember one of our newer staff nurses at large that's serving on the board. We were having a conversation, and she said she was afraid to even put her name in the ring to be considered for a board of directors because she's just a bedside nurse. Every person working in healthcare has something of value to bring to an industry partner, to a professional organization, to whatever it is that you're looking to do outside of the hospital space. So I think that's language that we really, as a profession, need to just squash because everyone has something to offer. And we need bedside nurses involved in professional nursing organizations like NAN. We need bedside nurses or those with that experience, working in industry, in advocacy, in research, in all the places that are actually outside of the hospital walls. If we don't have this experience in those spaces, then healthcare in general is just going to suffer. We all have to have a seat at the table and bring our experiences and our expertise and our knowledge and our backgrounds with us into these conversations and into these spaces so we can keep making sure healthcare can be the best that it is. And we all know that healthcare right now is struggling. We see it every day. Even though I'm not in the hospital world anymore, I have lots of friends and colleagues who are, and I talk to them every day in my role as Director of Customer Success. So we all are going to have to work together to make healthcare be what we know it can be. And it takes everyone. Everyone has something to offer.
Yes, absolutely. And, I previously had, I'm going to go ahead and call it a misconception because I think it is. I think I had the misconception that a professional nursing organization could only be valuable to me if I wanted to climb the clinical ladder within the hospital setting. Talk to me a little bit about how these nursing organizations like NAN can support nurses as they start to explore what is out there for them beyond just a traditional nursing role.
And that's a great question too. NAN is a great organization in that they see the value, just like I mentioned, in all of these healthcare provider roles within the NICU space. And they have intentionally set out to change their bylaws and become a more inclusive professional organization. So you may not know this, but NAN isn't just for neonatal nurses. They also now offer an associate member opportunity. So other healthcare providers within the NICU space can take advantage of a lot of the benefits and the resources that NAN has to offer. So occupational therapist, physical therapist, respiratory therapist, you name it, they can join NAN as well to be part of the healthcare community that's surrounding NICU patients and families. And that's something I think the average NICU nurse doesn't realize. You don't work in isolation when you're in the NICU. You as the bedside nurse, you're a member of a larger healthcare team. And we have to recognize that we're a team. We all rely on each other to take care of the patients. I would also argue that your industry partners who provide the products and services and supplies you use each and every day to provide patient care, they're also a part of the team. And we all have got to come together. And that's where I think nursing organizations kind of help bring everyone together in the same space to have conversations, to find innovations, and to help move patient care forward and improve upon it and, again, promote better patient outcomes. As a bedside nurse, being involved in your professional organization just opens up so many other avenues and conversations. It just really broadens your horizons and allows you to network with so many more people. Again, you're getting out of your silo of your individual unit and hospital and getting to see that there's a bigger world out there. So it is not just for those who want to climb the ladder. We need everyone in their respective roles. Everyone plays an important part, whether that be the patient care tech, the bedside nurse, the advanced practice nurse, the nurse leader, and all the other healthcare team members that it takes to provide care for those babies and families. It's a group effort, and that's where nursing organizations like NAN, I think, are really in a good place to push all of this forward. And NAN's not the only organization that has opened up membership to non-nurse members, but they're the one that I'm most familiar with, again, having served on the board. And that's where I think the bedside nurse, again, can use that professional organization to just grow their network, expand their horizons. And all it takes is, becoming a member and putting yourself out there for volunteer opportunities to get more involved.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know that we've covered a lot this episode, and I think a lot of really good advice as well. Before I close us out, is there any last piece of encouragement or advice that you'd offer to a nurse who's maybe feeling burnt out or curious about new opportunities, but maybe unsure if they would thrive in a new setting?
My best advice is to, again, build that network of people, introduce yourself to new people. Ask them, just like you asked me, what's your typical day like? Just, find out from people who have already made the leap or made the change into something new and different. Ask them, and I'm pretty sure that they'll be willing to share. There are more and more of us out there that have left the world of the hospital. You don't have to be a nurse and just work in the hospital setting. There's so many more opportunities out there outside of the hospital walls. All you have to do is look and talk to people, network, and you're going to, find the place where you belong. And there is a place for everyone. Like I said, we all need to be at the table helping push healthcare forward to improve and continue to provide exceptional care for those families and patients that are out there.
If you'd like to connect with Luann after today's show, you can find her on LinkedIn or email her at ljones@angeleyehealth.com. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, sign up for my free newsletter at mypivotpath.com. Get non-bedside jobs delivered to your inbox every week. And if you have questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time.